So, welcome back to Redefining AI, the tech podcast. On behalf of Squirro, the enterprise Gen AI platform, I'm your host, Lauren Hawker Zafer. Today, I'm honoured to be joined by a guest who has literally seen tech from every angle, and this is Jenny Fielding. So, Jenny is a founder, an operator, an investor, an author, and an educator who has helped shape the trajectory of over 300 startups. After beginning her career in law and finance, she took a sharp turn towards technology, launching two mobile software startups before moving into venture capital. She spent nearly 8 years as managing director at Techstars, where she was the first money into companies like Alloy, Particle Health, and Pair Eyewear, a portfolio that's now worth more than 10 billion. Today, she co-leads Everywhere Ventures, a global pre-seed firm investing in tech-enabled companies that are changing the way we live, work, and connect. And to top it all off as well, Jenny's also got a new book, and this new book, Venture Everywhere, captures her philosophy of founder-first investing and her global perspective on innovation. Now, from early stage AI companies to responsible disruption, from systemic biases and funding to what it really means to build something that lasts, Jenny brings not only experience, but an extraordinary amount of clarity and candor. So welcome, Jenny. Welcome to Redefining AI.
Thank you so much. That was such a great intro. I feel like I'm blushing that you did a great job.
Well, it's one thing for me to introduce you, but maybe you'd like to introduce yourself, or maybe there's something that I failed to highlight that you feel is of extra importance that our guests find out about.
Yeah, that's great. I guess what I like to say is that I'm both an accidental entrepreneur and an accidental investor. And I think at the core, I've always been someone who's looked for products and services and ways the world can operate better and more efficiently, and that's manifested itself as, becoming an entrepreneur. I built two software companies and now running everywhere. So I've fallen into both of these categories, but they really started from a primal desire just to see the world in a different light and hopefully a little bit better. And that's why I was excited to come on your podcast because I love the theme, not just about AI, but what that means for consumers, what that means for everyday people.
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting choice of, I'd say, classification. Accidental entrepreneur. There's many, obviously, that believe that entrepreneurs are not something that happened by accident. Do you feel that you have any sort of innate entrepreneurial traits, spirits inside you that would deviate from that classification?
Yeah. So I think you need some of those, as you said, entrepreneurial traits within. I was always someone, I actually worked in very traditional industries for a while. I worked in law and finance in New York City, right? Can't get more traditional than that. But I was always someone who was, maybe you'd consider them a bit of an agitator. I was always questioning things and wanting to know why we couldn't do things differently. And when I wouldn't get a satisfactory answer, I would just set out to solve them myself or build something or kind of pursue something. And that this actually goes back to be well beyond my early professional career to my childhood and always wanting to push the envelope and the limit. So although maybe it didn't manifest as entrepreneurial or as a founder early on, when I had the opportunity to actually build something and start a company, I jumped at it. But I definitely came from a different background.
hmm One thing that I actually wanted to pick up on, so you have highlighted you've lived many professional lives, lawyer, founder, investor, professor. What's drawn you or what drew you to technology in a way that maybe law or finance could, like, never could?
Yeah. So, as I said, I saw a problem in the world I wanted to solve while I was working at a large bank, JP Morgan in New York City. And so I didn't think of myself as a founder or as an entrepreneur. I literally just set out to solve a problem that ended up turning into a company and traditional kind of venture backed, high growth company, but didn't necessarily start off that way. And so I think it's always important to remind people again, the genesis of entrepreneurship is solving problems in the world, not necessarily setting out to raise money or do something that follows some type of playbook. So, kind of come from a different perspective in that way. And once I got a taste of technology, the scale, the impact that you can make, the number of people versus something like law, which is very one to one in many ways, right? You have a client, you help a client, but the scale that you can reach with technology, just with a few people and some code, was absolutely mind blowing to me. And I think once I got a taste of that, I was never really going to go back to something that felt service oriented because I loved that kind of one to many access that you would get.
So we're going to dive today, obviously, a little bit more into the path that you've chosen with technology and Everywhere Ventures. Now, you've mentioned the genesis to entrepreneurship is solving problems. Do you find that when you're looking to provide pre-seed investment, that entrepreneurs are thinking like that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I often look for entrepreneurs that I call empath founders. So they're oftentimes solving a problem that they personally experienced, someone in their family did, they saw something firsthand, they experienced it. And I find that those founders, oftentimes, it's coming from a very kind of visceral place of what they want to solve. So they're not there just seeing a white space, no one's doing this, I'm going to get a team together and raise some money. They really want to see the world differently because of an experience they had. And I'm very drawn to these empath founders and I really seek them out. And they can be across verticals. Like we get a lot of them in healthcare, right? Because
Okay.
people have had healthcare experiences, but we also have them in areas like future of work or climate. They've just had experiences where they feel that an impact can be made on a larger scale than them just kind of solving their own personal problem. So I'm definitely drawn to, I'd say, that characteristic founders that see the world kind of differently and want to build solutions for that world.
Is there a negative to that sort of component of empath founders? Because there is a strong affiliation that does come from emotional engagement. Is that a negative ever?
I think that's a great point. I'd say in every characteristic, there's kind of a good and a bad, right? So the good is that oftentimes these founders can really go the distance. We know that entrepreneurship is not what you read about in TechCrunch, where people are getting acquired after, 5 minutes, that this is a very long path. And so having that personal connection to a problem, I think, can give you the resilience and longevity that you need. On the flip side, sometimes empath founders ignore the data, right? So something isn't working, but they pursue it anyway because they are so drawn to the outcome. And that can be hard. And that's one of the things that we often help founders with is seeing things maybe that they can't see. And so as long as they're open, they have a learning mindset, I think that that issue can be compensated for. But I think sometimes they're just so hell bent on seeing this product in the world and solving this problem that maybe when it's not working, when they haven't found product market fit, when the market isn't adapting, when, there's challenges, sometimes they don't see it. So I'd say maybe that's the flip side of the empath.
Yeah, yeah, I would have imagined that. So you've invested in more than 300 early stage startups. When it comes to AI specifically, what separates hype from investable reality for you? And again, obviously at the sort of pre-seed stage where there's no revenue, or I don't know if there is mostly no revenue. How do you identify that?
Yeah, so we've been investing in the category for kind of, well, let's call it pre the LLM hype. So early kind of ML opportunities where automation was taking antiquated industries and bringing them up to speed. Fast forward to all of the incredible innovation we've had in the last couple of years. And we go back to that core principle. Are we solving actual problems? And we often look at our firm at these antiquated industries, whether it's things like logistics or manufacturing or healthcare, where we feel that this automation can really leapfrog the industry with insights and with technology that can take it to the next level. So, I guess what I'm saying, because we don't invest in AI infrastructure, that's not really our focus. I would say we're much more on the application layer. Is this technology, the enabling technology that will make the industry go faster? Will it be transformational? And oftentimes that can be AI, but if we look at previous iterations, whether it was cloud computing or obviously stuff with crypto, those were sometimes better rails to build on. Is this the right technology for this solution? And sometimes I think founders sometimes slap AI on everything. And you have to take a step back and say, is that actually making the outcome better, right? Does that process need to be automated in this way? So we try to dig down a little bit and understand, what does that mean for every kind of link in the chain within the product that you're building to be AI native? What are the things that need to be automated? Where's the real opportunity? And what are things that maybe work well with other types of infrastructure?
Hmm. And in your opinion, what have you seen that would determine the applicability of a necessity to automate it, especially in maybe the sectors that you've highlighted, logistics, manufacturing? There's a lot of talk about tech frameworks. There's maybe the start of experimentation, I would say, in Europe. You're in the US, maybe you can comment on the US market. But is the market really at a stage where it has identified applicable use cases, as you've said, enablement layers around automation?
I think the use cases are there. I think the real consideration is, are the companies ready to adopt these technologies, right? So, my second startup, what I learned the hard way was that the market isn't necessarily ready for your solution. So, my second startup was a text message marketing company. And when I started it in 2010, the truth was people weren't ready to get marketing on their phone. The phone was still a very personal, I call my mom type thing. And there was a psychological element. So fast forward to today. And as you mentioned, the promise of agentic AI just seems incredible for antiquated industries. But are they really ready to adopt this? And so sometimes you can be too early in a market. And so we love the entrepreneurs that are thinking about the future. How will manufacturing be transformed when agents can be operational and do a lot of the rote work that humans potentially don't want to do? But where are we right now? And how are we going to get there? So we try to spend time with the entrepreneurs really understanding how these industries are going to change and what the time frame is going to change. And so what I'm seeing on the ground across these industries, again, whether it's healthcare, climate, manufacturing, logistics, fintech is another one. Like, are we ready to completely have agents go out there and do all our banking reconciliation and all this? I'd say these industries are not exactly ready for this to hit prime time yet. And it's going to take a number of years because the plumbing and the infrastructure is so old and antiquated to bring them up to speed. And so, again, as an entrepreneur, you want to be early, but not too early.
100%. So maybe in response to that, I would imagine that you've seen on, I think it was the 7th of April, there was two memoranda that were released by the White House, and that was the White House office, I think it was management and budget. Now they have released these, the M2521, M2522, to encourage AI acceleration, essentially to frame the US and have AI as a national advantage. Is there anything that you feel should be responded to, or do you have per se any advice for people that are looking to navigate that space from an innovation perspective?
Yeah, I think you have a fundamental decision is like whether you have the capability and the know with all to build versus buy a solution, right? So if you're a larger organization and you're potentially a technology focused organization, you might be able to build a little crack team around some of the automations that you'd like to see. I think if you're kind of a smaller, medium sized business, you're probably not going to be able to do that. And you're going to have to look for solutions that may seem like SaaS solutions now, and that may actually change to point solutions. But what's good about it is that there's so much innovation happening. There's so many companies being built right now, is that you have a lot of choices as a business. So even if you don't have the capabilities in-house, there's multiple companies that can support you, both on the consultative side and then on the, call it, software as a service side, where you're able to, purchase something and have it be self-serve in your organization. So I think the good news is there's a lot of optionality. The hard part is just figuring out which area. Am I going to try to build something? Am I going to hire consultants to come? Which type of consultants? Or am I going to be able to have an off the shelf product? So I think we're in a little bit of a confusion time for medium sized businesses, but also an exciting one because you can kind of itemize, pick apart your business and figure out what are all the areas that we can make more efficient? What are all of the areas that we can improve? So ultimately, our customers, our end users, our stakeholders have a better experience. And the fact that the White House is supporting this, all the big tech companies are supporting this, I think is just moving everyone in the right direction, but it's not so clear. Like the playbook isn't so clear, right?
And that's maybe the component of worry, because a lot of these industries where it is encouraged, there's a necessity and a fundament for trust. It's a non negotiable, especially in the sectors that you're talking about, like fintech and healthcare. So, how do you also advise founders that are navigating that space from an innovation perspective where trust really is a non negotiable?
Yeah, it's a great point. Like, can you trust a new startup? And I think there's definitely some questions there. I mean, the good news is that you can use kind of bigger companies. I mean, just simply if you use Google Workspace and they've integrated Gemini into that, and all of a sudden, all your documentation, all your decks, like so much of your infrastructure has been infused with AI, and you didn't really have to do anything different. You paid a little bit extra per month and you're already using a tried and true brand. So I think there's options for companies on that front to just dip their toe in by small, obviously if you're using Salesforce, if you're using Microsoft, they all have AI solutions that can level up any company. So I think that that's easy. Smaller companies have to prove themselves. They have to make sure that they're compliant, that there's security, all of these things. And I think that that's a great opportunity right now because there's so much change happening in the industry. It's a great opportunity to really prove to your customers that we can be compliant, that we are using the best technology out there. So I see it as almost like a branding opportunity where you have to be very vocal with your stakeholders and really explain to them how you're integrating the best technologies into whatever products and services you're building. But I kind of see it as an opportunity to just get closer to your customer.
Yeah, getting closer to your customer. And you're trying to get closer to another audience as well. You wrote a book, Venture Everywhere, which I believe captures your philosophy of founder first, invest in. Why did you write the book and what do you want people to take away from reading it?
Yeah. So the book is 12 chapters, 12 countries, and 12 entrepreneurs who are changing the world in their ecosystem. And the takeaway from the book is increasingly, we all believe that innovation is everywhere. And why do we only hear about kind of the same characters building companies in the Bay Area, right? We know a lot about Bill Gates. We know a lot about Mark Zuckerberg. We know a lot about Elon Musk. What about all these incredible builders who have built companies that have gone public or been acquired or just have making a real impact, but they're doing it in Brazil or they're doing it in Africa or they're doing it in the Philippines. And so I wanted to shine a light on some of these names, which are not necessarily household names for us in the US, but they are making an impact in their geography. So it's a fun read. It's a little bit travel journal. You'll hear my personal experiences traveling through all these countries, understanding the startup ecosystem. And then the interviews are really very personal with founders who have, many of them come from war-torn countries or from real developing ecosystems where it just hasn't been so easy to start a company. There was a lot of headwinds and they were able to persevere anyway with a lot of resilience, really to chart their own path. And that is what the book is fundamentally about, is how do we all develop and cultivate the entrepreneur within to chart our own path.
And it's fascinating. It must have been quite an enriching and very personal journey for you to interview these individuals. Is there anything that you noticed in similarity or stark differentiation between them?
Yeah. So the book, I outline what I call the everywhere mindset. And it's kind of six core principles or maybe not principles, archetypes and characteristics that I noticed across these. One of the most fun one I think that I get a lot of people ask me about is this idea of Moxie. So this kind of concept that a lot of the entrepreneurs you meet, they're a little salty, right? They've got a chip on their shoulder, they have something to prove, and that they're not necessarily playing by the rules of politeness in a big company, but they're really have had to their ideas are so extreme that you have to kind of have that iron around you to protect you, and that we should celebrate this. I think, especially in America, it's not necessarily a characteristic that we like to celebrate, but honestly, this is what makes entrepreneurs great. This is what makes them persevere on big ideas. It's not because they're just talking about what everyone's talking about or trying to fit in. They really are the change makers out there. So that's a fun one for sure. I'd say the other thing that, and I go through kind of 6 of these principles, which you can read about in the book. But the other thing that was very poignant about doing these interviews, again, many of these founders have taken their companies public or they're unicorns, they're large, somewhat successful companies at this point. As people were telling me their stories, because I always start at the beginning, your childhood, and as
Yeah.
people are telling me their stories, about half of the founders that I interviewed got choked up on the call, like literally started shedding tears. And these are folks, they're pretty hardcore. You wouldn't necessarily experience that, but the founder journey is so intense. The road that they have traveled has not been easy. And as they recall and reflect on these experiences, it's very emotional. And that was something that was very unexpected because, again, a lot of these founders have been super, super successful. One of them grew up in a small town in Pakistan, and his family had never had, there was no education. He was the first person in his family. Meanwhile, he ends up building one of the largest, or maybe the most successful startup in the Middle East. He ends up selling that to Uber for $3 billion, right? And so I'm talking to him, and when you hear the vulnerability in their voice or you hear them get choked up, you really realize that the founder journey for everyone is a really intense one.
Yeah, yeah. Founders are extremely interesting and unique individuals. A question from my side, just out of curiosity. How many of those founders, and not from a purposeful choice through your own selection, were female?
So in the book, it's about half that I interview in the book. So yes, that's obviously something very important to me, is that we also shine light on women who are building companies. So some great stories. One of my favorite ones is a woman named Lori who's building just a massive company in Mexico. It's actually my first chapter. The company is called Kavak, and it's a marketplace for used vehicles. And I don't know, the last valuation was $8 billion or something. And she's just epic. And so celebrating those stories, which we don't hear about as much, was really important to me.
It's been fascinating. I want to thank you for your contribution today on redefining AI, and I'm sure that our listeners will enjoy this conversation. Thank you, Jenny.
Thanks so much, Lauren. It was a real pleasure.